The wash house squatted behind the grand Charleston home, like a secret no one wished to acknowledge. Its low roof forever sweating, its air thick with steam and lye. Every dawn, she entered it barefoot, the packed dirt cold beneath her soles, the iron tub already waiting. Water was hauled, fires were stoked, and soon the heat rose until breathing felt like swallowing ghosts. This was where time slowed, where skin blistered and thoughts grew dangerous. This was where she learned how long flesh could endure boiling before it surrendered. Her mistress liked to watch from the doorway, a handkerchief pressed delicately to her nose, lips curled at the smell of labor. Words fell sharper than any switch, reminders of ownership, of obedience, of how easily a body could be broken and replaced. Each insult soaked deeper than the water, settling into muscle and bone. The laundress bowed her head, as she always did, but something inside her had begun to count. Each slight, each scar, each breath held too long beneath the steam. On that day, the heat was worse than usual. The fire roared like it had been fed something living. The tub trembled as the water churned, bubbles breaking the surface, with a sound too close to breathing. When her mistress stepped closer, too close, the world narrowed to the hiss of boiling water and the thunder of blood in her ears. For a moment, there was fear. Then there was clarity, the kind that arrives only once, sharp and irreversible. Later, Charleston would speak of the incident in hushed tones, voices lowered behind shutters and lace curtains. They would call it madness, or sin, or an unspeakable crime. No one would speak of the wash house heat, or the years spent bending over fire, or how power can change shape when no one is looking. But the laundress would remember everything. The sound, the smell, the way the steam finally lifted. And she would know that some stains, once set, can never be scrubbed away. Marks the moment when the laundress's understanding of her world subtly, but irrevocably changes. Until then, the wash tub is merely an instrument of survival and suffering, a place where punishment and labor merge into one endless routine. It is where her days begin and end, where her body is bent over scalding water, until pain becomes ordinary and endurance feels like a moral obligation. The tub is not neutral, it is a symbol of control, reinforced by repetition. Each boiling cycle teaches her that pain is expected and silence is rewarded. And over time this lesson seeps into her sense of self. What shifts in this turning point is not an act of rebellion, but a realization. As she works, she becomes intimately familiar with the properties of the tub and the water. How long it takes to heat, how steam thickens the air, how flesh reacts when exposed too long to boiling temperatures. This knowledge is not abstract, it is learned through her own burns, her blistered hands, and the countless hours she spends tending the fire. The wash house, meant to reduce her to a tool, instead gives her an education rooted in suffering. She begins to see that the same system designed to break her also contains the means to undo another. This realization does not arrive as rage or fantasy, but as a quiet, unsettling thought that she cannot immediately dismiss. The tub is no longer just a site of humiliation, it becomes a space of potential. For the first time, power does not feel entirely distant or theoretical. It feels measurable, tied to temperature, time, and proximity. This is crucial because it reframes her relationship to violence. She does not suddenly desire it, but she understands it as something governed by physical laws rather than divine or social ones. That understanding strips away some of its terror and replaces it with grim possibility. Psychologically, this moment fractures her enforced submission. Even though her outward behavior remains unchanged, an internal boundary has been crossed. She has imagined an outcome beyond obedience, and imagination itself becomes an act of defiance. The tub now holds two meanings simultaneously. the weight of her oppression and the seat of her agency. This duality creates unbearable tension, because once she knows what the tub can do, returning to ignorance is impossible. Every future act of washing becomes charged with implication, every bubble rising to the surface a reminder that power has quietly shifted, even if no one else can yet see it. Occurs when cruelty ceases to be part of an expected pattern, and instead becomes a rupture that cannot be absorbed. Until this moment, the laundress has survived by understanding brutality as routine, something cyclical and impersonal, delivered without reason and therefore endured without question. Pain has rules, even if they are unjust, and as long as those rules remain intact, endurance feels possible. What changes here is not the severity of the act itself, but its meaning. A single gesture from her mistress violates the unspoken boundary that has allowed the laundress to endure without breaking inwardly. The act may appear small to an outside observer. A public humiliation, a punishment delivered with deliberate slowness, a reminder of ownership performed for spectacle rather than correction. But for the laundress, it carries a new weight. It is done not out of habit, but intention. There is pleasure in it. The mistress's gaze lingers, her words sharpen, and the cruelty becomes personal in a way it has not been before. This is the moment when suffering stops being structural and becomes intimate. The laundress understands, with chilling clarity, that her pain is no longer collateral, it is desired. This realization strips away the last illusion that obedience might one day soften her treatment. It reveals that there is no limit to what can be taken from her, no threshold that will provoke mercy. The system she lives under is not merely indifferent to her humanity, it is actively nourished by her degradation. In that instant, endurance loses its moral weight. Survival no longer feels noble or patient, it feels complicit. The strength she once took pride in now feels like a chain she is helping to tighten around her own body. Emotionally, this moment ignites something far more dangerous than anger. It gives rise to resolve. Resolve is quieter, colder, and harder to extinguish. She does not lash out or cry. Instead, she withdraws inward, sealing off a part of herself that has been repeatedly violated. Her silence deepens, but it is no longer the silence of submission. It becomes deliberate, watchful, and inwardly focused. She begins to measure her mistress not as an authority, but as a physical presence. Someone who occupies space, who breathes, who bleeds. This turning point is essential because it transforms the laundress's relationship to her own limits. The cruelty exposes the lie that she can endure endlessly without consequence. Something inside her draws a line, invisible but absolute. Beyond it, there is no return to passive suffering. From this moment forward, every action she takes is shaped by the knowledge that restraint has failed her, and that the cost of continued obedience may be greater than the cost of resistance, even if that resistance demands an unthinkable price. Where knowledge and resolve converge into action, and the abstract possibility of power becomes a lived reality. The wash house, once merely the backdrop of suffering, transforms into a closed world where social hierarchies lose their authority. Inside that steamy enclosure, there are no witnesses, no polished manners, no symbols of refinement to shield the mistress. Heat reduces everything to the same vulnerability. Breath shortens, skin reacts, and fear becomes unmistakably human. For the first time, the laundress is not reacting to cruelty, but directing circumstance, and that reversal reshapes the moral gravity of the space. This moment is not impulsive. It is governed by the same patience that has defined her survival. She understands the fire, the water, the timing, and the physical limits of the body because she has lived them daily. When power shifts, it does so quietly, without proclamation. There is no dramatic declaration, no sudden transformation into someone unrecognizable. The laundress remains herself, but the role she occupies changes. She is no longer merely subjected to the environment, she controls it. The wash tub becomes an extension of her will, a tool that answers to her hands rather than burns them. What makes this turning point especially unsettling is its intimacy. The act unfolds at close range, forcing an encounter that cannot be abstracted or distanced. The mistress is no longer an idea or a voice issuing commands from the doorway. She is present, frightened, and stripped of the authority that once made her untouchable. The laundress must confront the reality of what she is doing in real time, without illusion. This proximity ensures that the act is not fueled by fantasy or rage alone, but by a clear-eyed acceptance of consequence. Psychologically, this is where the laundress crosses the threshold from imagined defiance into irrevocable choice. Once the balance tips, there is no retreat into obedience, no version of events where this becomes a warning rather than an ending. She understands this, and that understanding lends the moment its terrible weight. Power here is not exhilarating, it is sobering. It demands presence, endurance, and the willingness to bear responsibility for what unfolds. This turning point also exposes the fragility of the system that once appeared immovable. Outside the wash house, laws, customs, and violence enforce hierarchy. Inside, elemental forces rule. Fire does not recognize status. Water does not discriminate. By wielding these forces, the laundress exposes how thin the veneer of dominance truly is. The act itself becomes less about vengeance and more about revelation, laying bare the truth that control was never absolute, only enforced through fear and proximity, both of which dissolve in the heat and steam of the wash house. Centers on the aftermath of the act itself, when the laundress is forced to inhabit the reality she has created. The moment violence ends, time does not reset or grant relief. Instead, it stretches, heavy and inescapable. The heat lingers in the wash house, the water still restless, the air thick with steam that refuses to clear. What has occurred cannot be undone, explained away, or softened by intention. The laundress is no longer defined solely by what she endured, but by what she has done, and that knowledge settles into her, with a weight far greater than fear. This turning point is crucial because it strips away any illusion that the act could bring freedom or emotional release. There is no triumph, no sense of victory. What replaces action is a profound stillness, one that demands reckoning. She becomes acutely aware of her body again, her breathing, her shaking hands, the ache in her muscles. But now those sensations are charged with permanence. Every detail imprints itself on her memory, not as spectacle, but as proof. She understands that this moment will follow her beyond the wash house, beyond the day itself, shaping how she sees the world and how the world will inevitably see her. Emotionally, this is where the cost of agency reveals itself. For so long, she has been denied responsibility, treated as an extension of labor rather than a moral being. Now responsibility crashes over her in full. She alone carries the knowledge of how the balance tipped, how silence turned into action, how a private space became the site of an irreversible outcome. This burden is isolating because it cannot be shared or confessed without consequence. Even if no one has yet discovered what happened, she knows discovery is only a matter of time, and that anticipation becomes its own form of confinement. This turning point also alters her relationship to memory. She cannot separate herself from the act or reinterpret it into something distant. It is intimate, slow, and undeniable, bound to her senses and her choices. The wash tub, once a symbol of suffering and then of power, becomes a reminder of consequence. It holds the echo of what she was forced to become in order to survive a world that offered her no other language of resistance. In this stage, the laundress does not seek justification or forgiveness. Those concepts feel abstract compared to the immediacy of what she now carries within herself. What remains is endurance of a different kind, the endurance of identity reshaped, of a life that will never return to what it was, even if outwardly nothing appears to have changed at all. Occurs in the quiet aftermath, when the act's consequences ripple outward into a world that cannot fully comprehend what has occurred. Charleston, with its polished streets and grand facades, continues its daily rhythms, yet beneath the veneer, whispers begin to gather. People speak cautiously, eyes darting behind lace curtains and shuttered windows, the story passed in fragments, half words, and murmurs. The laundress herself becomes a shadow in these conversations, a figure both feared and misunderstood, defined by what she did rather than who she is. In this stage, her power is paradoxical, absolute in one private space, yet distant, invisible, and mythic in the public imagination. The legacy of the act does not manifest in immediate recognition or celebration. It manifests as a persistent, almost spectral presence. Every glance, every hushed comment, every tightening of lips conveys the lingering weight of what happened. The laundress walks among these people, yet a barrier separates her from them. They see the surface, the dutiful hand, the quiet posture, the continued labor, but they cannot see the internal reckoning that has reshaped her entirely. In the silence that follows, she is no longer merely a survivor of cruelty. She is its executor, its living embodiment, a human fulcrum around which fear and speculation pivot. This turning point also explores the transformation of memory and history. What occurred in the wash house cannot remain private for long, not because of confession, but because acts of such intensity leave traces that ripple outward. The event embeds itself in the consciousness of those who sense it, coloring their perception of her and of the household itself. The laundress becomes a figure of caution and awe, an unspoken reminder that submission has limits and that the oppressed may act in ways the powerful cannot anticipate. The act's significance is amplified by silence. The unspoken horror grows larger than any visible scar or reported fact. On a personal level, this turning point solidifies her internal identity. She has crossed a threshold from endurance to irrevocable action, and the consequences now define a new framework for her existence. Every interaction, every task, and every reflection is infused with the knowledge of what she has done. She carries the act not as a fleeting rebellion, but as an enduring marker of agency. It transforms her sense of self, simultaneously isolating and fortifying her. She is forever marked by what she enacted, aware that no explanation or apology could alter the reality she now inhabits. At the same time, this stage highlights the unsettling duality of power and fear. While she has claimed control in the wash house, the social world outside has constructed its own version of her story, one that blends fact with rumor, moral judgment with fascination. The laundress exists both as a living person and as a legend, and this dual existence shapes every future encounter. Every step along the streets of Charleston, every glance exchanged with those who know the story only in part, while the full truth remains locked within her.